the Namibia Institute of Corporate Governance, and it's good to have you back this evening. It is our second last session. It's the 10th session, and it's the second last session of Fireplace Conversations for this season, and we'll be back next winter, I hope so. We're going right into our topic of tonight, which really ties into the topics that we have done the past 2 sessions. It was about board culture and about board management relationship, and everything else that we have done actually in the past speaks to, or today speaks to everything else, and it's ethical leadership, the cornerstone of good governance. And with me, I have on my left, Mr. Willie Mertens. He is the Chief Executive Officer of DEP Marine Namibia. And before taking that position as CEO in November 2022, he held a position of Chief Financial Officer at DEP Marine Namibia, with oversight over financial accountability of NamDEP Holdings. He is a registered chartered accountant by profession with a graduate diploma in mining engineering from the University of Witwatersrand, South Africa. He also completed a senior executive development program through the London Business School, and he serves on the boards of Ashburton Investments Managers and the Development Bank of Namibia, and previously he was on the boards of different industries, including electricity distribution, banking, aviation, vocational training. So a rich leadership background right there. And right across me, I have Ms. Edla Kaumpi. She is basically in education training, and she's a development practitioner who is passionate about bringing out the best in people. And she has more than 7 years experience designing and facilitating training workshops. As a certified ethics practitioner, which is very ideal for the topic, with over 10 years experience in auditing and risk management, she combines her training, knowledge, and experience to create environments of integrity, passion, and excellence. She was the first in Namibia to run an ethics office for a private entity. And her time is spent giving ethics and leadership training to organizations, providing them with strategies to manage ethics in their workplaces. And she's also a certified project management professional with undergraduate studies in information systems and operations management. She's deeply spiritual. She likes to put this out, being a graduate of the Every Nation Leadership Institute, the Africa Leadership Institute, as well as the leadership program from the Bethel School of Ministry. And this is a unique combination of skills, giving her an edge and a keen sense of understanding people, business practices, and translating these into comprehensive learning outcomes. And then I have finally with me Ms. Fanny Nikevali, and I had to practice that a little bit. She serves as the CEO of ICANN, and might I just say that ICANN is actually a proud sponsor in this season of Fireplace Conversations, and yes, we appreciate that very much. She's a registered chartered accountant with the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Namibia, and she is also a registered accountant and auditor with the Public Accountants and Auditors Board, and a member of the Namibia Institute of Corporate Governance. We are so glad for that last part. And she holds a postgraduate degree in accounting from Rhodes University in South Africa. She has over 10 years management and leadership experience in various industries, both in private and public sector, and has experience working with boards, executives, management, as well as employees on all levels of the organization. And she serves on different boards, including a committee of the Namibia Institute of Corporate Governance. And again, we appreciate that deeply. And she has obtained a certificate in human resources management from the University of Cape Town. It sounds like such a long, introduction to the speakers, but it sort of speaks to who they are and what they bring to the table as far as the topic is concerned. And we appreciate that background, the leadership, and the expertise that you all hold. So welcome to this session. And to start off the session, and I think I'll go right to Fanny, governance and leadership or ethical culture are conjoined. And while good leadership or governance can be coined by assigning power, defining roles and responsibilities, governing communication of stakeholders, and ensuring accountability accountability, for example, corruption enters a company through its leadership and filters down to its employees. Good governance coupled with good ethical leadership has a potential to create a good organization. And in this segment, we really want to investigate how cardinal that nexus is, that link between governance and ethical leadership. And so just to start with you, ethics is an elusive concept to many. And I really want you to define ethics in relationship to leadership. And so defining it in relation to leadership might be even more elusive for people. It might be an intangible concept or even a reality to people, considering the bad reports that we read every day. How can we demystify ethical leadership to those already in the marketplace and those whom we seek to groom?
Thank you so much, Vincia. First and foremost, thank you for the kind introduction. It's really good to be here with my fellow panelists here. It's really good to be here this evening. So yes, you're absolutely right, Vincia. I couldn't agree more. Ethics is really an elusive concept, especially when it comes to leadership. Why, though, is it so elusive? And I guess the main reason is because of its complexity. When you're dealing with ethics, you are really dealing with human judgment, human morals. You're dealing with what is right and wrong, what is just and what is not just. So you really have this broad human judgment that comes into play, especially in leadership positions. There tends to be this misconception that when you're in a leadership position, you need to be ethical. And unfortunately, that is far from the truth. You still find leadership professionals that unfortunately are not ethical. As you mentioned in your introduction, all the reports that we're reading, prove accordingly. So corporate governance is all about leadership. And leadership is about making ethical decisions. So you can't separate the two. Absolutely not. I don't think you can say you are strong in corporate governance, but you're unethical. Absolutely not. You can't also say, well, I'm ethical, but you don't practice corporate governance. The reason, though, why it is also so complex is because a lot of moral principles that arise out of being an ethical leader, some of them are very universally accepted. I mean, if I ask all of you around here now, is it right to kill? Of course, everybody will say absolutely not. That is a universal acceptance. But there's some, ethical decisions that are based on probably culture or religious beliefs or personal values, and that makes it so complex. So back to your question, what is the nexus between corporate governance and ethics? You can't separate the two. Absolutely not. They are interrelated. They are conjoined. I don't think you can have one or the other, but I guess maybe that's up for debate with my panelists here. And really the whole concept about ethical leadership is doing the right thing. And I even want to add, it's doing the right thing right. I think that is also very important to understand. So that is really just me summarizing it as an introduction.
That sounds good. Ms. Gombe, would you like to add something to that nexus, creating that nexus?
Yeah, sure. And I think maybe as somebody who does training is to just break it down to say that ethical leadership has to do with, like you said, doing the right thing and so on, and principles such as transparency, fairness, accountability, and so on. And you can't do these things if you don't have good corporate governance, because they provide the framework for decision making. But this decision making has to be infused with moral principles, doing what is right. And what you're saying about what is right is recognizing because the framework for ethics is this triangle for this decision that I'm making or this good that I have. Is it good just for me or for the others? It has to be, because the golden rule for ethics is don't do unto others what you wouldn't want done unto you. So this decision that I'm making, how does it affect others, the stakeholders? So identifying your stakeholders and seeing how this business decision or this process or whatever, how does it affect these other stakeholders is what's key. Because whatever decision I'm making as a corporate governance person, how does it affect my stakeholders? Because we don't want to do harm and we want to maximize benefits. So it's always keeping that in mind. how does it affect others?
Yeah, how does it affect others? She basically says that do unto others what you'd have them do to you. Is that something that we can really apply to ethics? Because what if, we will later talk about doing the right versus doing the right, or doing the right versus whoever deems what is right, who deems, who says it's right, and how do I determine that for that stakeholder that is a right decision, Mr. Mertens?
Yeah. Yes, I mean, thank you for inviting me to this platform, and I mean,
It's
this
a pleasure.
is probably something that is topical, because sometimes, when you look at a lot of failures, I think it comes from not acting ethical. Yeah. Now, I want to go back to what is right. I mean, there's a lot of definitions around what is right, and we should probably look at what is not right.
Okay.
Yeah. So what is, when I'm faced with a decision, what is the not right thing to do in a specific instance, rather than focusing on the right.
Okay.
Because my right may not be your right, depending on where I'm coming from, depending on how I grew up, because that determines how I behave in a certain instance. And so to link it to corporate governance for me is simplistically corporate governance, I mean, as the process of making decisions and how do we implement those decisions. Ethical behaviors, how do you act while you are making those decisions?
Oh, that's good.
And how do you relate with people while you are doing that? Because a right thing may be not relational when you talk to someone. I may tell you, no, Edla, that is wrong, but is that the right way?
The way you speak.
Yes. So the not right way may be, taking into account your feelings, but at the same time making sure that, what I do is ethical in terms of while I'm making the decision. So I wanted to maybe just put that out there to say, being ethical is how you act and how you behave while you are making these decisions and while you're implementing, and whilst you are busy with corporate governance. Because for me, corporate governance is, and to have good corporate governance cannot be separated from acting and behaving ethically.
And the first statement I made, and I will allow you to speak just now, Edla, is that ethics or ethical leadership, just that concept in itself is elusive. What the two of you just said about there's a way you act is already something that brings about so many hundred questions so what is right? If I need to consider what is not right in a situation, how do I determine that without knowing what is right? So that is probably the question that one needs to answer. And perhaps you answer this question by infusing in that conversation some of the elements that need to form part of the decision in making the decision of right and wrong. And perhaps you said transparency is one of those things, integrity is some of those. Fairness. So I want you to unpack those elements a little bit more for the listener who's thinking, right, doing the right thing. What's the right thing to do? When is it the right thing to do? Doing the right thing is probably gotta be contextualized. It probably starts with those components.
Yes.
You can latch onto what you wanted to say and then answer that. The components of ethical leadership. Yeah.
Now, I was just agreeing with what he's saying. And honestly, I really want us to walk away from here and not feeling the mystique or the mysticism of it. Because we really need to demystify it. Because at the heart of it, and I always say we can make it like it's this thing, ethical leadership. But at the heart of ethical leadership or ethics is people and people behavior. And values, right? So these things look like something. So just on the basics of ethical leadership, like I said, it's fairness. So doing right. So how we treat our stakeholders. And it really has to come down to do no harm. And so I like to define it, what I said earlier, as don't do unto others what you wouldn't want done unto you. Because saying it as do unto others what you want done unto you is a bit, because of diversity, is not, I think it's not a very inclusive statement, or I would rather say don't do, because generally we don't want to be treated badly. But what I deem as good for me is, but that's a whole other topic. But let's say, so fairness is one of them. Accountability is really big on them, that if somebody does something wrong, they should be kept accountable. There has to be consequences. Responsibility. So responsibility has two parts, is doing what is required of me, and that's in terms of governance as well, but also in terms of me not doing harm to others, whether it's the environment, whether it's society, the people who work for me, my customers, all of that is my actions should be responsible towards them in terms of causing little harm. Like I don't want to do harm, whether it's, pollution or unfair treatment, not paying people right, those kinds of things. So it's those kinds of behavior. And then honesty, and being open and transparent. So openness and transparency, those are behaviors. Those you can have an ethical framework based around those things, and you can unpack them further in terms of what it looks like, in terms of how we advertise, in terms of how we recruit. And, every aspect of our governance frameworks can be infused with these principles, I think.
You have a background of auditing, and then my two colleagues here, or panelists, they are actually accountants. And my first degree actually is accounting. And I remember the one thing that was ingrained in my audit class is ethics. And I want us to just discuss a little bit from your own professions, how is that contextualized into practical professional setting? How do we practice ethics practically in an office? And I really want to keep at the back of my mind that thing about doing right. I'm coming back to that.
Vinci, I think that is a very fair question, and I like the fact that you did state, specifically when it comes to specific professions, and perhaps I guess since you pointed out our profession, the accounting profession, yes, being ethical is meant to be ingrained in our DNA. I mean, we learn it from academics. I can't speak on behalf of all the other professions, but that's how we are basically trained. However, the question is, and research has actually been done with scholars, with psychologists, can you actually teach ethics? Is it teachable? Is it one of those concepts where you sit in the classroom, you do an ethics course, you tick it off, I'm ethical for life? You can't do that because it's really not a destination, it's a journey.
Okay.
And the conclusion was that yes, ethics can be taught, but to what extent and how? So to answer the question directly is the practicalities thereof. You can actually teach it, but it has to be a step, and it has to be through experiences, practical applications, etc. And fortunately, within organizations, you have guidelines. So you will have, for example, a code of conduct or a code of ethics. In society, you've got governance frameworks like the King 4 Code. These guide you, and if you don't comply, you are disciplined. Is that not the case? So and that is supposed to be, and unfortunately, it does happen in a lot of industries. But you do find, for example, and I think this is a very key one, and I think you'll all agree, where you can teach ethics in as much as you can, but then you find yourself in an ethical dilemma where what do you do now? Even what I am taught is not going to apply here. You find it especially in the medical industry, where nurses and doctors have to make decisions on behalf of patients. Do I do the ethical right thing, or do I do the legal thing? Maybe I'm now probably ahead of your question, but just to summarize, yes, it can be taught, but it is the how, and the how is not having a code of ethics that's just gathering dust. It's not being applied. That's definitely not the case, but it's through practical experience, exposure, guidance, coaching, mentoring, and etc.
Okay, I think that those are steps to enhance or even to introduce ethical culture. I think so. It's either you are enhancing what's already there, or you are introducing. Can you actually teach ethics to somebody? I feel like ethics, these tenets of it that you mentioned earlier, like the components like fairness probably a little bit an extraneous factor, but integrity, accountability, responsibility, honesty, and those are innate things. Can you teach those?
I mean, the question is probably, are people inherently,
evil?
or do they inherently have integrity? Because if that is yes, why do have some companies, including mine, have integrity as a value? So that's let's leave it out there. But can you teach it? You can put principles there. But like Fanny just said, you cannot prescribe for every situation that may happen. And many a times when in practical terms, what I've picked up is when someone comes to you and asks a question, can I do this? Then that person already knows the answer that I should not do this. I'll give you
That's a good one because I actually mentioned it today to a group that I was training. Sorry to cut you, but that once you are asking yourself the question and you are in doubt, it probably already tells you it's a guideline that what I'm about to do is probably not the right thing. Please go ahead.
It's about receiving gifts or being invited to lavish parties and those sort of things. So if you have to come to someone to ask for permission, then you already know.
Yeah.
So can it be taught? I think we can put guidelines there. And it's a judgmental thing. And I think, Edla, you mentioned in the beginning, it's for every person to look at this and say, will I be able to make this decision, if I'm in different circumstances?
Yes. Okay.
And will I get to the same conclusion? And, when you doubt, I think that's where you probably realize it's not. So back to my first question, I think inherently people have integrity.
Okay.
It's when you are faced with a situation like, Fanny was mentioning about, and it's circumstantial. If I have to pay a bribe and someone says, either you pay it or I'll do harm to your child or to your wife.
Yeah.
Do I pay the bribe? Or do I pay the bribe
What's
just
the
to get out of
ethical
this?
thing to
Yes,
do?
what's the ethical thing to do?
What is the ethical thing to do?
Maybe we ask the experts to answer that question.
Edla, what is that thing that you must do?
But that speaks to the question that you said later about the right thing and the right. Okay, that's the right thing and the wrong thing. But it's too. I'm doing the wrong thing, but I'm saving a life because saving life is a moral obligation. So it is wrong. It is wrong to pay a bribe. We know that, and then hopefully you're willing to live with the consequences of what comes with paying a bribe. But on the other hand, it's like speeding.
Yeah,
I know I'm breaking the law, but if somebody is lying at the back of my car dying, but that's the other thing. And
so I just want to chip in quickly and help you there with, so luckily I also have legal expertise and in law we call that necessity. So, if you committed a crime and that would be the defense in that case, obviously it's occasion. So you, by two evils or two things that need to be balanced, so conflicting issues that need to be balanced, and when that happens, we call in law that the lesser evil.
Exactly.
So both are evil, but the lesser evil is probably the one that you want to occasion in a specific situation. But obviously, that's a far-fetched situation, though, that you mentioned. In business and in the corporate world, perhaps. I mean, I can only think that it happens in movies, and I've not been in your industry. Probably that's probably happens that people can literally say, if you don't bring those diamonds, we're gonna make sure to hold you hostage somehow. Does it happen in practice that people get to this level of of challenges that they face, where they have to make the decision between conflicting interest, where your life is at stake or somebody's life is at stake? Can you answer?
In an organization, I think where everything starts is with the purpose of the organization.
All right.
So you need to make sure that that is clear. Everybody buys into that.
Okay.
And we are guided by that purpose. And that purpose as a foundation, and that foundation are the values.
Exactly.
Right.
And those values prescribes how in a company you act.
Yeah.
Where you find the conflict is where my personal values are different to those values.
Nice.
Now, if you look at a value of respect, respect for the environment, respect for a fellow human being. So if I, in my outside life, talk down to women or talk down to a specific tribe, and in my organization, I need to respect women and I need to respect everyone. That conflict is where you normally have a challenge. It's a bizarre example, but
it's real.
But it's real.
So when we look at culture in an organization, you need to make sure that those values that we have all agreed to, that we understand what they mean, and we bring them down from the walls into the hearts.
Yes.
And once you have that, you've got a value-based organization, then it becomes easier for people to act ethically, because ethics is not something that happens in the workplace. You got to be ethical
Yeah.
toward your life, or
Yeah.
when you go outside, wherever you go. So
Yeah, I really like what you said. I really like what you said, because that's what I was going to say next about, and to your point earlier about how do you teach it or how do you embed it, and it's those things. It's understanding the values, and as in organizations, and so we're talking corporate governance, is deciding those frameworks, deciding what is it, what is our code of ethics, what do we live by. And when you talked about earlier that people are innately, they have integrity. I mean, there's the 1080 international principle that says only 10% of people are truly always honest and integrous. Yeah. 80% of people are, it depends what's happening. Okay. We try to do that. We generally good. We want to save the person who's stranded on the road and whatever, But you get the 10% of people who, it doesn't matter. They're just trying to see like, I wonder if I can unmount that camera and steal it. Or their brains are just always trying to steal from somebody. But 80% of the people, it depends. And that's why when you think of the fraud triangle, it depends on, is there an opportunity for me to do wrong? What pressure is there, whether my child's life is in danger, or finances at home, or the Joneses, or whatever. And then whether I can rationalize. Yeah, I'm going to take this money because these people don't pay me well. I'm going to take this money. I'm going to go home earlier because I wasn't paid over, whatever. So those things kind of determine what the 80% will do. Like, will I go to the right thing or will I go? And that's why in organizations, we need to have these ethical frameworks. We need to have codes of conduct. We need to have values that people live by. But there has to be consequences for those who are not in alignment with these values or the guidelines of, principles. And that's why we have to have controls. I mean, auditors, they know that. You have to have controls so that there isn't opportunity for people to do the wrong thing. But you also need to have these value discussions and training so that people are moved. So organizations should make it easy for people to do the right thing. That's why leaders need to live the values. They need to lead by example. We need to have dialogue and talk about dilemmas and things and teach people how to make the right decisions, I think.
You mentioned that triangle, the fraud triangle, very important, and creating the scenario for people to act ethically.
Yes.
You've only mentioned what I can hear, and I want you to add onto that, Fanny. You mentioned that there should be policies that help us, to really direct our thinking, direct our conduct, and so on. And then we also have to have trainings and interventions and so on. How about, you mentioned something else which was very important, incentivizing our people the correct way, Fanny. Once that creates the gap and perhaps the palate or the appetite to fall into the bait of unethical behavior. How can we assist our companies or corporate organizations for people to act ethically, not just with policies, not just with trainings, and these values that Mr. Mertens has talked about. And I was just in my training today, or in my intervention that I had earlier in the morning, I was talking about the hallway test where, this ethics, you want to have this ethics inculcated so deeply in the organizational structure within the people, that in the hallway test, when I walk past you and I stop you as a boss and I say, what's that other value that we share again in respect of what? And then you can, say, it's integrity. So everybody's, on the same page about what the values are. But what else can we do to help people steer in the right direction?
I think my two colleagues here have summarized it so well. But I really want to touch on what Willie said, and that is the obviously the concept of the personal values. Because at the end of the day, in an organization, like you said, they're humans. Humans are made up of values, okay? And these values are inherent and they're different from individual to individual, from culture to culture, etc. So now what happens then is the values that are then normally accepted by society become ethical principles. So those are the ones you mentioned: accountability, transparency, etc., integrity, honesty. I think most of organizations have realized that these are the values that they need to strive on. At least those are the basics. So that would then be the foundation of the organization. Now, how do you go and make sure that it's ingrained in the organization? It's first of all, you have to practice what you preach. And I think the King 4, for example, that framework specifically says it is the responsibility of those charged with governance, the leadership, to set that example. And they need to create that ethical culture. And you can't teach ethics better than setting an example. It's the same in your home. If you have children, you need to set the example as a parent. It's the same with an organization. So that is the ultimate key. So setting the example, meaning you live the values, you talk the values, you share the values, be it having regular value workshops. It's all about the values, because you might find values are values, but values can also lead to morality, and morality then depends on society and circumstances and can change even in a phase of life. And that's where people differentiate. So you might find people in an organization that this person believes in honesty, but the other person, because they've grown up in a different culture, to them it's not necessary. You have to bring the two together and balance it. And that is setting the example, preaching what you preach. Practicing what you preach. Practicing what you preach, and really creating an ethical culture. It is not about textbooks. You can send your employees to courses. I don't think it's going to have the same effect as the practice. I think that is ultimately
Mr. Mertens.
Really,
I'm thinking of what I started when I introduced this topic. I mentioned that we read about so many bad reports, corrupt leaders, and corruption. Perhaps there are many elements to it, right? You mentioned the fraud aspects. There are many elements to everything, and we probably have to contextualize in every situation. How did that become a corrupt act? Of course, if you look at it from the legal side, it's defined in the Criminal Procedures Act, and there you can already define what it is. But in a corporate world, in commercial crimes, you always find, or many a times we find that leaders, they have the policies. We have set the tone in the entity in terms of our culture. We have the policies are in place. We have done the trainings, even with the leaders that are failing us. When we incentivize them monetarily, perhaps well too, in some cases. But you find that these people are always found at the end of misconduct. What can we do differently? What is it that we are lacking? What is it that we're not doing right as a nation that, one after another, our leaders are found wanting when it comes to ethics?
I think, part of that sits in one of the things that you said, the incentivizing.
Okay.
Now, you incentivize someone for, the company, if the company performs at this level, then this is your incentive. Now, what you are doing inherently is that subconsciously, you are telling that person, I must do everything possible to make sure that I, because we work for incentives, so that I get that incentive. And sometimes you get a decision to make between something where there's a borderline, and your first thinking goes towards how does that impact that performance that will eventually get to my pocket. Now, locally for me, there are two challenges in what I see in how boards and management is set up. It's for me in the 3-year directorships, in the 5-year, contracts that we have. True. Because if I have a 5-year contract and a maximum of, so what do I work for? I just work for the end of those 5 years. And we start creating finite organizations compared to infinite ones that we want to make sure that they last, beyond us for the generations that will come after us. So when you have that one where you have a board for 3 years, you have management for 5 years, already you have that conflict of that CEO is only working for his next contract. That board member is thinking, because remember, decisions that we take today only comes into fruition maybe 5, 7, 8 years from now. So any decision that a board member takes now, he's not going to see the impact of that. So you are inheriting an organization and decisions that were taken before you. And that creates a lot of conflict. And that's why, unfortunately, is the big challenge that I foresee personally that we have in our SOEs. And why many of them are probably not performing optimally.
Does that speak to how their leaders, especially in public entities, are conducting themselves insofar as ethics are concerned? Their term of 5 years or the directorship or 3 years?
I would say probably not directly.
Okay.
But if you look at a lot of things that were happening, maybe it's less now, but previously, conflicts between boards and management. My personal assessment is it comes from that, because people are working for different objectives. It's no more the organization. So what we need to do is we need to forget about ourselves, and we need to do what is good for the organization, for the longevity of the organization. Even if I'm not around there to see, the success of that, because your legacy is not what happens during your tenure. Your legacy is what happens once you are gone.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think if we have that mindset of what I'm doing here is infinite, then we'll see change. Now, I don't know whether there's ethical component to that, because it speaks to what am I working for? I mean, I'm working for myself to make sure that I get the accolades while I'm there. And so that's what I think is probably what's a challenge currently.
And it's probably something worth mentioning, but also considering against the realities of change management and so forth that needs to happen, transitions that needs to happen, because the 5-year period is also to optimize performance within the period of time, although also there are considerations about sustainability and so on, continuity and so on. So these are all things that need to be balanced. I think there's a conversation that needs to happen to balance. And I think that's really a conversation that we could have, and perhaps not in this segment, but a valid conversation that should be had. I'm hearing Mr. Mertens, but I'm still thinking, what must we do with our leaders?
Yeah.
They are still failing. What must we do?
Yes.
I just really want to touch on that incentivizing, because one of the key areas where incentivizing also comes in organizations, which unfortunately at times is not successful, is the whistleblowing aspect. So employees are encouraged, if you experience any unethical behavior or any fraudulent activities, please, there's a hotline or whatever, do the right thing. However, the reason why I'm saying that at times it's not successful is because what has transpired in many organizations, public and private space, is that there is no protection. So the employees want to do the right thing. They want to, do the morally right thing. But there's no protection for these employees.
Exactly.
So there's backlashing, there's discrimination. Sometimes it can even cause death.
Ostracizing as well.
Exactly. But it is such a good incentive to have, but it is how it is managed, and the after effects of employees that are trying to do the right thing within the organization to report unethical behaviors in leaders. That is unfortunately the reality.
Yeah, that's an unfortunate reality. Edla, you wanted to add something?
Accountability. I think if we get accountability right, we should be because everywhere, because there should be consequences. Why are there no consequences, and why are there not proper accountability structures so that somebody's able to get away with what they're doing? They shouldn't be able to get away with that in the first place. There should have been structures such that it makes it hard. Again, triangle, the controls, so that there isn't opportunity for somebody to do the wrong thing.
And when they do it, that
there should be consequences. Yes. Like
I
even in the church, it's so sad. It's.
I hear you. That consequence management
we don't
aspect is probably very key. And I heard that come up in perhaps most of the segments that we have done this year. And when I go back to listen to the segment that we have, the comments that you read sometimes are about accountability and just asking, so now you have a board that's not functioning well. Why don't you remove them? The leader is fraught with corruption and unethical behavior. Why is he still leading?
Exactly.
Why are we not holding people to accountability? And I think this is probably something that I'll give you a turn now. It happens in a scenario where you can establish wrong right versus wrong quite easily. It can be identified. It's conspicuous. It's out there to see. I quickly want to transition to the issue of right versus right. But I want to have you speak about what you wanted to say just now.
I was going to say, I mean, to be able to have consequences, you need to have a system.
Yeah.
And that is not there. The performance management systems to say, look, this is what you promised. This was the commitment beginning of the year. You have not even done half of this. So unfortunately, you have to go. So that foundation is not there. And we need to start with that to make sure. And, and sometimes you just get, when I see a strategic plan that is this thick, then I know no one knows what's in that book.
Unless they've workshopped it.
And then we have a function and we say, we're launching our strategic plan. And then you just go ask the CEO, see, Mr. CEO, can you tell me, what are your 5 big things that you're going to concentrate on? You look at the CEO scorecard and once it has more than 12 things, we need to focus on the 4 or 5 things that will make the organization go forward. And if you don't do those 5 things, then unfortunately you're not the right person or you're not the right group of executives. Then there must be consequences. And it must be made clear from the beginning. And that is not there. Hence, there's nothing happening if organizations fail.
So frameworks.
And so frameworks, yes. Yeah. I think we really have to get to a place where consequence management is top of the agenda for companies or organizations generally. We spoke today again at the intervention that I heard earlier, and he touched on board management relationship. That was the conversation. But within the context of that, we were talking about rotten apples and how we retaining rotten apples in the hope that they are gonna change or be fixed or or something like that. But what I want to say is with change management, obviously with consequence management, certainly the first step is to try and rectify, try and fix, and after that it's the inevitable of removal and so on. So definitely have to look at the framework of how that is done. There's the aspect that we have to help our leaders with when we are faced with the dilemma of two conflicting rights, where morality versus the legal thing to do. And I think the example that I have is where Google, for instance, was evading to put it bluntly, tax, because they literally channeled their revenues through various tax havens. But this was 2014, yet it's an example that's still relevant today, isn't it? That they were channeling their revenues through various tax havens before ending up in the lowest tax jurisdiction, where they really, their tax was commuted or that it was at a less rate than they would have paid in the initial or the other jurisdictions. That's perhaps not legally wrong, but what are the other considerations that one should have? Because the decision inherently legally is not wrong. They were taxed. They were just taxed at a lower rate. But at the same time, there are other things to consider. If they paid the correct tax, the impact that payment would have had for the society, because remember what we do with tax and how we improve our societies and so on. So that would have been probably a bigger impact had they done the right thing. But that right versus the legal right, how do we have to balance that?
Yeah. I think it's an interesting one because so it is right, the way they've done it. There's nothing wrong with it. But what is not right, and all of us around here, we are buying apps, which we are paying for, on our phones. When we, download apps, we buy apps. But our government never sees anything of that revenue.
Okay.
From, whether it's from the Play Store or what do you call it, Apple, the App Store or the Play Store. So there's nothing wrong with those companies not paying here. But the not right thing is for this country to contribute towards your revenue, but you are not giving anything back from where the revenue is generated. And then those taxes are paid somewhere else. Now, you're asking what should be done. And And
How can we balance those
how can you
rights?
balance that? And I think you have to look at, that the people in the organization, do they have that frame of mind to say, look, let's, it's the right thing not to pay the taxes there, but the not right thing is for those countries not to receive some of this benefit.
Exactly. So balancing that is difficult. It's not
It's not an easy task.
I really think, again, it's having those ethical frameworks and being absolutely clear about what is it that we stand for, what are our values, and what are the non-negotiables. Ne? But in terms of, what is right and right, you said it in the way that you phrased your question. It's about the greater good and about the longevity, like the long-term impact of the decision that I'm making, and I need to assess that. And it's really because ethics is about, the good for others in terms of stakeholders, in terms of the harm that I'm doing or not doing to others. It makes sense to have these committees to consult widely, and because it's cultural context and things like that, then talk to the people, talk to the stakeholders who may be affected by your decision and see, do impact assessments? How does this decision versus this decision affect, what's the outcome of this, what's the outcome of that, and what's the impact? And also just in terms of long term, because now the reputation is now a bit, so think about, who am I, who we are, our purpose, our identity, and our values. And how does this affect our branding and our identity? But also, like I said, the impact.
I think, Fanny, that probably is a key issue here when you're balancing out these rights. Certainly, the two rights, there's nothing wrong with what happened in the Google case, but the impact, the impact determines what was actually the right thing to do. So in retrospect, you would have seen in the circumstance that, so when you are thinking forward-looking thinking, you obviously have to think about the impact that you have that's going to be made by the decision.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. I don't know what you want to call it, whether it's ethical paradox or ethical dilemma, but these things are not easy, and they happen in everyday life. What we're referring to here, going over and above your own personal interest or the organization's interest, is corporate citizenship. And that is really a terminology that hasn't been widely accepted yet. But that is going over and above what your responsibility is for the organization, but rather for the society as a whole. It's that citizenship. I, as an individual, I, as an organization, how do my consequences affect society? So me paying lower tax, how is it affecting society? Now, obviously, like Willie said, there's nothing wrong with it. But sometimes you cross boundaries where it becomes, for example, tax avoidance, or it becomes tax evasion. And you can argue that those are actually just morally wrong and also legally wrong, because tax evasion, you don't even want to get into that. That is legally wrong.
Yeah.
So and as part of and I like what you said just now within the organization structure, how does it impact the society? One of the recommendations is, which is also partly a new concept now, is to have like a social and ethics committee, which addresses things like that. What is going to be the impact? And I know some of these requirements are just expected, for example, listed entities, but I think it goes for any other organization to really think about the social aspects and to also embed corporate citizenship into their structures and into their ethical cultures.
So I think that the issue about the tax avoidance, that's definitely legally you can be held to that. Nothing quite wrong with it, like we said, but ethical considerations, they need to come in. And I think what you said, and I think there's a comment here by one of the viewers about balancing and making clear those non-negotiables in an entity, because you spoke about frameworks, but you need to make sure that within those frameworks people have understanding of the things or the values that we are not negotiating on. And maybe I'm thinking, when I'm thinking about putting everything together, and I'm coming to a conclusion really that culture change, we need an overhaul of our culture, organizational culture that permeates the ethics that we're talking about, and where there is a lapse in that culture in organizations, and we continue to find that our leaders are failing us, consequence management really needs to kick in. And I'm just thinking of public entities, and my pain is there because the private entities have clear-cut procedures and ways that they deal with this. Hopefully, some of them clearly don't have, but the ones that do have, the ones that are mainstream, normally have provisions in place. But I'm worried about public entities, and that we rotate, we take the leader that has failed us in one entity and we rotate them to the next entity, hoping that they are more ethical in the next organization than they were in the previous one. We need to deal with that, right? And I think because we now, unfortunately, out of time for this segment, it was so quick. I want us to quickly touch on that aspect, and each one of us just give me your final thought on how can we really ensure that our public entities, and of course other organizations as well, are run well in an ethical manner. And what can we do about those leaders that continuously fail us? And how can we make consequence management real in Namibia? Really, how can we inculcate that? Should I start? Mr. Mertens sounds ready for me.
So what could we do? I think it's an individual thing. For me, each person must look into yourself, look into the mirror, because many a times we say, yeah, but I was not found guilty.
Yeah.
And that's not the point. It's because when I was not found guilty and I go to another organization, because the tone gets set at the top.
Yeah.
Yes.
And when I go there, people will say, we know this guy. This is the way he acts. And everybody starts acting like that. And then we don't understand, but why are the people not listening what I'm telling them? But your behavior says something different. So for me, is we need to look into each, you cannot, put policies and procedures into these things. It's an individual thing, and as a person, you need to look at yourself and say, maybe this is not the place for me to be. And once you are there, do the things that are right for the company, for the organization, for the longevity of the organization.
Yeah.
Not what will put you up there on the pedestal. Let us become second, and be human. Once you've made a mistake, own up to that, because you get respected for that. And once you've done that, make sure that you don't go back to that. And then of course, we've got the codes and the code of conduct and all of those things that must come with consequences.
Yeah.
And that must have non-negotiable things. If you have done this, if you've done something wrong, whether it's the first time or not, you must be out. And we just need one organization, a public organization or private organization, to start doing that and say, I'm not going to.
Exactly.
This is for me a no-go, and others will follow.
I think so.
But we need an example.
We need that example, because currently we only have the opposite example. Unfortunately, we keep rotating people to other organizations, and they haven't done well. Please go ahead.
Be the same person that you are inside and outside of the organization.
That's a good one. And
that's integrity.
Everything you have spoken about speaks to self-regulation.
Yes, that's the only way.
And unfortunately, the reason we have law is because people fail to regulate themselves, and somebody externally or a system needs to kick in to hold people accountable when they're not able to regulate themselves. But that's just a thought that I want to leave with what you have said, because you've said something that's very important, and that needs to be paired with accountability. Edla, what are your final thoughts?
So obviously, as an ethics practitioner and a training, it's like there are steps. The tone has to be set from the top. I'm one part of the pool of the GIZ consultants who's supposed to help private public enterprises with performance management, and I attended a workshop that Miss Louise was there, and I was so excited. The things that they have in mind to do and the performance management frameworks, it's so exciting, and I'm like, this gives me hope. But it's hopefully that it's not just something on paper, but that actually gets implemented. So if the tone is set from the top, if from the top, the people who have the authority and who have the power, if they can make a decision to be the people who will lead by example and who will enforce these things, then it can filter down. So so there has to be a tone from the top, and then having clear-cut governance and ethics frameworks. Everybody needs to understand what is expected of them and what the consequences are if this doesn't happen.
Yeah.
But then they follow through to actually, do the consequence management, apply the consequences.
Yeah.
And then somebody should make sure that those people who are supposed to apply the consequences do that. So is that. And then codes of conduct. So people need to understand this is what we stand for. These are our values. These are our non-negotiables. Like, all the entities should have that. And then institutionalize that. In other words, have conversations, have dialogues, have training. The Africa Leadership Institute has this booklet with different stories in Namibia, normal stories about whether I buy we use my medical aid to buy stuff for my grandmother who's not on my medical aid, the way you pay your domestic workers. So things like having these conversations and opening our minds and dialogue about what is right, and oh, wow, this is the mirror, and like, oh, yeah, sure, I did that, and I realized now it's not right. Have those conversations institutionalized, and have independent assessments after that. How are we doing? What is the impact of our decision? Have somebody do that. So if we can get just that framework right, and then, different steps within each of these components, I think we'd be okay. But people must actually do the things.
Yeah. And I think you said now about accountability, making sure that you do hold people accountable. You only can hold somebody accountable when you have acted right yourself.
Yes.
I think we have the
Because
dilemma
it's
in
still-
leadership. I'm so sorry. Did I preempt you? I'm so sorry, but I'm thinking that maybe let me hold the thought so you can
No, it's difficult to be last because everything has been said. So I think all of you just literally stole the words out of my mouth. But, policies, procedures, code of ethics, holding people accountable, it's all good and fair. But I'm a firm believer still of the citizenship aspect and starting with yourself.
Yes.
That saying that says, it starts with the man in the mirror.
Yeah.
If you don't hold yourself accountable, how do you expect others to hold you accountable? So it starts with yourself, self-accountability, speaking out. And a lot of us fear that. We fear speaking out because what are going to be the consequences? And, there's this whole, let's follow the masses. There's a very popular quote that says, right is right, even if no one is doing it. Wrong is wrong, even if everybody's doing it.
So good.
And at times you need to follow your right. And it starts with yourself. A code of ethics can be there, man in the mirror, individual citizenship. Those are my closing words.
So good.
And I hope that our leaders can hear that part, because I can see all of us mention one word, mirror. And that actually everybody, all of you have mentioned that word in your closing remarks. So it's important that we introspect, that we go back to ourselves and say, am I even the leader that I wish for this country to have?
Yes.
If I'm not the leader in my house, in my own life, and in my company that I wish to see as a president, as the minister, or whoever who's leading our country, if I'm not that person, I perhaps am not the one that should be speaking about accountability and about ethical leadership. But once I have that fixed, first by me in the mirror, then I'm able to then speak out and then hold others accountable and to, basically be able to inculcate that culture of ethics throughout the organization. So the tone really is set at the top.
Yes.
Starting from the top and making sure that we have ethical leaders who are inculcating ethical leadership throughout the organization. You wanted to say something?
I wanted to say, I agree with, it's true. We must start with ourselves, right? But it shouldn't be because I've done something wrong, I can't call you out. If you did something wrong, right? Because that's why it's good to have a group, that's why you have committees and things to keep mutual accountability. So I can't say, hey, Vincia, you stole. And then you say, yeah, but you also stole. But that doesn't make it okay. Because if I did something wrong, you should also call me hold me accountable. And if you do something wrong. So we shouldn't, because, the whole, he who is without sin cast the first stone. It's like, no, we're all with sin. And it's not about casting stones, but it's about uplifting community and calling each other higher to do the right thing.
And calling each other out maybe starts with yourself.
Yes,
I think
of course.
Generally, you always go back to yourself and say, let me fix that. I did wrong, but let me fix that so that I'm able to lead the next person to doing the right thing. Because when you lead, you are leading from the front, even from the back, wherever you're leading from, you're
From
leading.
the top, from under.
Yes, you are leading in a certain direction. And so we need to get ourselves to become ethical in the way that we lead. And I think if people who are leading us get that right, I can imagine the type of country that we can have with all these oil discoveries and all these niceties that are happening in our country. I swear, if we get our leadership right, the aspects of corruption don't even have to enter our minds in this country, because of the culture that we have cultivated in Namibia and in our organizations. And so I want to leave us with that thought and what everybody has said about looking ourselves in the mirror and making sure that we start to lead ourselves so that we are able to lead our organizations ethically, and then our country ethically. That's very important. And we cannot have ethics without governance. And governance we can certainly not have without people who are actually implementing it in a very ethical manner. So thank you for joining us, and thank you, my panelists, for being here and bestowing on us all the wisdom that you have. We hope that people have heard and learned, and every aspect that we could not cover in this 1 hour, hope that we can read up for ourselves on it, and reach out to the Namibia Institute of Corporate Governance. We do trainings and we offer this culture change and culture interventions as well. So I think it's time as a country that we look at our culture and that we started to do the right things because they are the right thing to do, not because we are impelled by anyone to be doing the right thing. And we want to leave you with those thoughts from Fireplace Conversations on the Namibia Institute of Corporate Governance. We look forward to seeing you next week for the last session for this season. Have a good evening.